Hey guys, welcome back to Tent Outdoors. Today we are doing Alone, Season 10, Episode 8. And there are 4 people remaining. Stick around for a full recap. So this episode started out with Mikey in his shelter. And he's obviously feeling a little bit annoyed because he had a long night with mice in his shelter. And I can definitely relate to that because it happened to me many times. So Mike actually made a deadfall trap that he just triggered by pulling a string to activate the trap, and he ended up killing 4 mice throughout the night. Now, I know he calls them rats, but he knows they're not rats. He's just kind of making a joke, calling them rats. So they show Mike skinning and cleaning these mice and roasting 2 over the fire and saving 2 for later. Mikey comments on his determination to outlast everyone left in the game, to win the money, and make life easier for his son. So Mike has been saving some dried meat and the bones from the animals that he's harvested, and he makes what's called a mortar and pestle, and he ends up grinding up the dried meat and bones into a powder, and he's saving it to make pemmican for later on in the game. So this powdered meat and bone mixture that he's creating, he's storing it in a meat bag, and he calls it his powdered meat bag, and he doubts, actually he's quite certain, that no one else in the game has a powdered meat bag. So Mike heads out hunting with his bow and a few forage bags that he's created. Unfortunately, he isn't able to find any grouse or small game, but he is able to harvest quite a large bag of berries. And he speaks of how he's going to make fruit leather. So the next scene for Mikey in this episode is him sitting in a shelter and it's raining and hailing outside. And he makes reference to how much he hates being stuck in his shelter and not able to be outside doing what he needs to do. So to keep his mind occupied, Mike makes a puzzle piece out of wood. And that puzzle piece, if you don't know, is a symbol for autism awareness. And he ends up making an awesome dream catcher with that puzzle piece, the centerpiece of that dream catcher that he created. He speaks to the audience about how upset he is that he is missing his son's birthday and that he has never missed a birthday before. So Mike spoke to the audience about how much he misses his son and that the feeling is so strong that it actually causes him physical pain. Now, a few episodes back, when I was having one of my little sad attacks, I made reference to the same sort of thing. Like when you're missing your family and your kids, you got this feeling in your chest, and it really is similar to physical pain. Mike made another powerful statement in this scene. He said, "My son is the reason that I want to go home, but my son is also the reason why I want to stay." So next up on the episode was me, and they showed me lying in my shelter, and I was discussing how a mouse had run over my arm during the night and was waking me up. And I don't know if you've ever slept out in the bush before in an old cabin or in a tent, and you can just hear these mice scurrying around. I mean, you're not in any danger. It's just annoying, and it's difficult to sleep, you know. So when they're actually running over your body when you're trying to sleep, it gets kind of annoying. I went on to describe what happened when I woke up, and I shone my light on the little mouse at the edge of my shelter. He was just looking at me. He had beady little eyes, and we were just staring at each other. He wouldn't move, and he's like making this weird thing with his mouth and his eyes, and it seemed like he wasn't scared of me, but as soon as I moved, then of course he took off. So my wife knit me a wool sweater many years ago, and I ended up taking it on the show. In the next scene, they show me revealing this massive hole in one of my sleeves that the mouse had actually chewed through the night. And I heard this from time to time. I heard this chewing, but I didn't know where it was coming from because I was using my clothing as an extra mat to sleep on during the nights. So when I discovered this, man, was I mad. And I named this mouse, this roommate of mine that was causing me all these problems, Scotty. So I knew it was time to take care of my mouse problem. I wanted to live with these mice harmoniously in my shelter, but they were destroying my stuff, so I had no choice but to make a deadfall trap to try to reduce their population a little. So my next scene, they show me revealing my new lure that I had created, and I made some changes. I made a longer steel leader to try to prevent the pike's sharp teeth from snapping off my monofilament line, hoping that it would make a difference. I also made the body a lot shorter and was using smaller hooks to try to get a few more hookups and lose less fish. Even though the morning was very cold and I wasn't very hopeful for catching fish that morning for some reason, I decided to give it a try. Even when I didn't think there was a chance of catching fish, I always tried to catch fish because sometimes you just never know. So as I'm fishing, I'm trying to remain positive. I'm in a pretty good mood at this point for some reason. And behind my fishing rock, I heard several grouse fly and land fairly close by. So I grab my camera, I grab my longbow, and I head up, and finally I'm able to actually see them. So I made reference on the show that these grouse were kind of my nemesis. I was having a hard time being able to find them in the trees. I know they'd land, I know they'd be in this tree or this tree, and I'd be scanning the trees as closely as I possibly could, and sometimes I just couldn't pick them out. And they knew I was there, and as I'm looking for them, they used to fly away on me fairly often. But this one in particular, as I walked up there with my camera and the bow, I was able to see him because he was skylined, and I ended up making a good shot on him. It was a quick, clean kill, and I was looking forward to having some chicken. A little message came up on the bottom of the screen that I'd lost 41 pounds so far. So at this point in the game, I think we're around day 40, late 30s, I had lost all the weight that I'd gained. So I'm actually down to almost my regular weight, because I'd gained between 40 and 45 pounds for the show. So my next scene in the episode, they show me sitting up in my bed in the middle of the night, and I had an experience with an invader in my teepee, and his name's Scotty. The little mouse returned. So I'll tell you that story. So I remember I was lying there, and again, I could feel this weird vibration. I could hear a slight sound, a slight chewing sound. And I found my headlamp, I sat up on my bed, I turned it on, and I was trying to figure out where this noise was coming from, because I did not want him destroying any more of my clothing. To my surprise, I looked down at my hip, and he was like nestled into a little piece of fur on my jacket, and he was chewing this fur. He was so into chewing this fur, he didn't even run away when I was like moving around and sitting up, and because it took me a little bit of time to find him. And there he was, like right at my hip, chewing on the fur lining of my jacket. So I looked down at my hip and I gave him a good smack with my hand, and that was the end of Scotty. Little did I know that there was more than just Scotty. My very last scene in the episode, they show me coming down to the beach from my shelter and looking down the beach to my fishing rock, and I see that my fishing rock is covered in snow, and I was really hoping that the area where I stand is not covered in ice, because if it's covered in ice, I would not be able to fish in my favorite spot. Next up in the episode, we have Taz. So they start out with Taz explaining how he's going to focus on fishing for the day with a rod that he created. Now he's going to focus on active fishing because his gill net has been destroyed beyond repair. I really like Taz's rod. I like the way it was long and really flexible to take some of the stress off that line if he's playing a big fish. So they show him catching a small lake trout. Shortly after that, he catches a decent sized pike. So Taz fillets up the fish and decides that he's going to make fish head soup for that day, smoke and preserve the fish for later on. I want to talk a little bit about that fish head soup. So when you're out there, you want to utilize every bit of energy, fat, and oils you can from that fish. So I know Taz did it, and I know I did it, and I'm sure most other contestants did it as well that were catching fish. So instead of discarding the fish heads, you just boil the heck out of them in a pot of water for quite some time. You just boil them down. And there was a big chunk of meat in the cheeks that would just kind of come off like a hockey puck. But once it's been boiled down for half an hour, even 45 minutes sometimes, it creates this broth. And this broth, you can just tell, is so rich in nutrients and fat. And actually by this time in the game, I was actually really enjoying that fish head soup broth. I mean, I remember drinking it and feeling so satisfied after drinking it. So as Taz is enjoying his fish head soup, he hears something in his kitchen part of his camp. And he grabs his bow, runs down, and he knows that it's the marten that's been stealing his trout. And Taz makes an excellent shot on this marten and ends up killing it. So remember in a previous episode, earlier on in the show, they showed me releasing a live marten from a trap. And there's been quite a few questions online about why I wasn't able to kill that marten. Like, whoa, what's Taz doing killing that marten? I thought they were illegal. Why did Alan end up releasing that marten from his trap? And the answer is because you're not allowed to trap marten, but you are allowed to kill them with a bow and arrow. Taz finally caught up with his trout stealer. So they show Taz in the shelter eating the organs, eating the tongue, and gnawing some meat off the marten's head. And he made a comment like, definitely an acquired taste. So Taz heads out, do a little hunting, some scouting, and to check his snares. He still believes that getting a big game animal is a possibility, And if he achieves that, it'll take him further into the game. He also mentioned how he ate more the last few days to give himself enough energy so he can go on these hunts. During his excursion, the wind really kicks up and he is unsuccessful locating any game or sign of moose. So in order for Taz to keep a positive mindset, he built a guitar. And man, it is a sweet guitar. And I was very impressed with the quality of it and actually how it sounded. Nice work on that guitar, Taz. Now, when you're in the game and you're not doing anything, those are the times when those dark thoughts start creeping in. And I know that Taz built that guitar to keep himself in a positive mindset. So Taz wakes up, gives the audience a little song with the guitar he created, and decides to utilize his canoe, take into deeper water, and try his luck at fishing. They show Taz quite a ways out in his canoe, doing some fishing. I noticed he was jigging off the side. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to catch any fish on that particular trip. And he's starting to feel a little emotional, starting to discuss how much he's missing his kids, and he's feeling some guilt about not being there with his family. When Taz gets back to his cabin, he alludes to how he's feeling. He's feeling really low on energy, his legs feel weak, and there's a message on the bottom of the screen that he's lost 52 pounds since this adventure began. So they show a scene with Taz outside a shelter, doing a little interview in front of the camera, and he's having a sad attack. He just misses his home, he's feeling emotional. And just being on the show with Taz, I had sad attacks fairly often. I mean, usually once a day, always centering around either missing my wife, sad thoughts about my family, my mother, my father, or missing my kids. And yeah, I call those sad attacks. And I kind of just let them happen and get that emotion out. And I found that if I just kind of let the emotion get out and have my little cry or have my little talk to the camera about how much I missed home or missed my family, or I found that they passed and they actually didn't last that long. So day 40, Taz heads out to do some fishing and some exploring. The snow is blowing, it's windy, it's gray, it's kind of a miserable day, and he starts doubting about whether or not he should be going that far to do some fishing or he should have stayed close to camp. He's walking slowly and makes a comment about he will be out of food by tomorrow. Taz makes some reflections on his life, talks about when he was a kid, and some of the difficulties he had growing up, especially with his stepfather. Taz speaks a lot about his children and how he's feeling some guilt about not spending enough time with his children, and he doesn't want to miss anything. Taz is worried about his future food procurement and is concerned about long-term health effects if he doesn't continue to eat while he's on this experience. So Taz makes the decision to tap out and remove himself from the game. There are now 4 contestants left. So my wife gave me some really important advice before I headed out for this experience. She said, find something every day to be grateful for. And I tried to do that, and they alluded to that in the episode a little bit. And I also said something, I think it was when I was fishing, that if you want to focus on the negative out here, it's not difficult. So I really tried to keep that positive mindset as much as I could. Did I have meltdowns? Did I get angry? Did I have sad attacks? 100%. But I tried to stay positive as much as I could. So next up in the episode, we have Melanie. They show her kind of in a windy environment, and she wants to make everything as easy as possible, including lighting a fire. So she decides to build like a big windbreak around her fireplace. Currently, Melanie's relying on a good store of berries. She's creating reindeer moss flour and rock lichen. So she's actually doing a really good job foraging and creating her calories that way. Melanie's using her knowledge of history to help her survive during this experience. A good example of that is how she uses punky birchwood to help seal and chink her fire shelter. That was actually pretty cool, and I had no idea that you could even do that. Melanie talks about the importance of having a strong mind game to take you further into this experience. As Melanie was sitting by her fire in the morning, she had what I called a sad attack. And she fought through it though. You gotta let them happen. Let those emotions come out, and they eventually pass quite quickly. So Mel shared with the audience how her boyfriend proposed to her shortly before she left for the show. And she told a neat story about how her husband ended up proposing to her, about following artificial bear tracks and having a romantic surprise and a ring waiting at the end of it. So next up on the episode is Wyatt. And they show Wyatt again with his infected sore on his forearm and squeezing some more pus out of it. He assures us that it's doing fine and it's healing, he's taking care of it, and he ends up putting another bandage over the wound. So the next day shows Wyatt fishing with the rod that he created, doing a few casts. He's not having any luck. He hasn't had any fish in his gill net for a few days. He didn't have any followers on the lure. He's really noticing that the fishing is starting to slow down. And he also makes reference to how cold his hands are getting, and it's really hard to keep them warm when you're fishing. I had the same issue. Even when it was cold, I couldn't fish with my gloves on. So I found that at about this point in the game, you could only fish in short bouts. Then you had to either run up to your fire and warm up your hands or take a break and put your gloves on. And it did make fishing a lot more difficult. Wyatt made reference to having some food stored up for future use. And there's a little note on the bottom of the screen that he has lost 44 pounds since the beginning of the journey. He also makes a comment that he doesn't feel it's going to be too long before he's going to be ice fishing. So on day 40, Wyatt makes reference to how he's really feeling the cold now, and he had to break the ice in his water pot in order for him to brush his teeth. He tries to stay positive and says, well, at least the wind isn't blowing, and he does a cool little happy dance, celebrating that he made it to day 40. Wyatt goes on a little scouting trip looking for berries, reminds himself to walk slowly so he doesn't sweat, and he ends up finding some berries in a shallow layer of snow, and he collects as many as he can. He makes reference to how the berries are dying off, and foraging is really coming to a minimum now, and he's almost just down to protein. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, everyone. My name's Al Tenta. This is Tenta Outdoors. Don't forget to check out episode 9 of season 10 of Alone next Thursday night. We're down to 4 people, and things are getting exciting. We'll see you next time.